Hello everyone, and welcome to the 7th lesson in my Guitar Sage series. Like the last 3 lessons, this one's going to be sponsored by the Headwaters Music and Arts in Bemidji, Minnesota. I've been teaching there since 2005, so it's been a pretty long haul to say the least. If you want to learn a musical instrument or take a pottery class or an art class, I also run a chess program there. A whole bunch of cool things are happening at that facility. So if you want to show your support, visit their website, or you can go ahead and subscribe to their YouTube channel. Now, for today's lesson, I'm going to talk about something that every musician should be able to do, and that's going to be improvising. Now, I want to point out right off the bat that this is not something that I can actually teach you directly, in the same way that I can't teach my students how to be motivated. That's something that you're going to have to figure out for yourself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few different techniques that you can use with the scale that we talked about last time. And this is going to be that A minor pentatonic scale, which is also the C major pentatonic scale. Now, before we do that, I do want to point out that it's going to really help you out to think about music as a language. And it's also cool to note that music is one of the only forms of language where everybody can speak simultaneously, and yet everybody be understood. So if you think about a band that has a bass player and a drummer and a piano player and a harmonica player and a vocalist and a guitarist, everybody is expressing themselves creatively through their instrument, yet everybody is understood simultaneously. That doesn't work in most situations. Like, imagine yourself going to a get-together and everybody's speaking at the exact same time. Like, nobody's going to understand anybody, but that's not so in music. But in the same way that if you were in a conversation, you may have hundreds of thousands of words in your vocabulary, but if you don't have anything to say, whatever you do say is just going to fall on its face. It's not going to be that interesting. It's not going to be very inspiring. So we have to figure out what we're trying to express while you're in the midst of improvisation. This is something that's going to have to come from yourself, but I'm just going to give you a few different techniques to be able to express that inner drive or that inner passion through that pattern. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first things first, what I ended up doing to make this a little easier for you guys is that I ended up taking the Headwaters Groove, which is a song I wrote as a promotional video for this lesson series, and I took out all of the soloing, so all of the guitar solos, the bass solo, took it all out. And what's left is all of the backing tracks, or the drums and the bass and the ukulele and the rhythm guitars, like all of that's going to be in the background. So a great way to introduce yourself into improvisation is to play with these backing tracks, because then you can hear how your notes are blending into the chords that are being played, how you're going to be utilizing various rhythms. It's a great way to introduce yourself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you in the exact same way that I introduce this to my students, who happen to be very young, because a lot of them, if you say, hey, you have this entire pattern to work with, you can do whatever you want, and they'll give you a blank stare and they're like, what? Like, no, it's way too much for them to process. So what I end up doing is I end up narrowing their focus. I end up selecting a couple different notes that they can use. And as they gain that familiarity, as they gain that confidence, then I start expanding it to more and more notes along this pattern here. So what I'll do is I'll be like, all right, you get one note. You get to play this thinnest string on your 5th fret, and that's the only note that you're able to play. So I'll start it off here. It's gonna sound something like this. So look, you get a bit of a groove for it. You get yourself into that feel, and whenever they're ready, they just start playing this note and improvising with it. And once they're familiar, like, yeah, all right, got a good feel for that. Then I'll add the next note on that string. So now you have 2 different notes that you can be able to play. So when they start jamming, it's going to sound something like this now. I'm like, yeah, you're getting it. Now I'll add the next 2 notes directly below that. So now they have 4 different notes to work with. So now we have these 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll go the next string down, giving them 6 notes. I'm like, you're really getting it. All right, so now you get your 4th string in the mix. Now you get your fifth string. Now you get all of them. I could do that forever. But the main point is that start small. Like, don't start with the entire pattern right off the bat. Narrow down your focus to a certain amount of notes and then expand as you gain that confidence. Now, this is something that I'm not even going to consider a technique. It's more of an insight into how you can go about approaching the exact same thing that we mentioned earlier. I talked about the idea of narrowing down your focus to more manageable proportions. Like, don't try to tackle the entire pattern. Start small, build your way up, and eventually you'll be able to play all of the various notes. But what I noticed within a lot of my students is that they'll end up playing each note once. Like, it'll be something kind of like this. Where they're doing something like that. Now, what I recommend, and usually when I do, they're just like, whoa, that's a game changer, is, hey, you don't have to play each note once. Why not have some fun with your right hand and play each note multiple times, which may sound something kind of like this. You can throw a little music in the background. So again, they'll start with this. Nothing wrong with that. But then all of a sudden you add the idea of adding multiple times per note, you get something kind of like this. And the moment that you even suggest it, it's like they just start flying on this soloing idea versus this idea of, playing one note at a time kind of a thing. But again, this is not really much of a technique. It's more of an insight in how you can attack that pattern. The first real technique that I'm going to introduce is going to be slides. Now, I'm going to try to put these in order from degree of difficulty. I'll try to start with the easiest techniques and then work my way up to the more difficult ones. Now, when it comes to doing a slide, all you have to do is you have to maintain the pressure on your finger as you move your way up to a note. So for example, if you want to slide up to that 8th fret on your thinnest string, which is a part of that pattern, you would end up putting pressure down on your finger. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick out the string and then you're going to slide your finger to the fret that you want, which is going to be your 8th fret. So you would end up putting your pressure down, you strike the string, and then you slide it up. Or if you want to slide down to that note, you do the exact same thing in reverse. And you'll have to experiment with the amount of pressure that you put on your finger as you slide your way up. But slides are a cool way to kind of add a cool element to your playing. So for example, if I were to, shall we say, add this into the mix, get that music kind of going at some arbitrary spot, and I'll just throw some slides in there. It's a cool idea. It takes a little while to get used to, but it's very, very fun once you get a hold of it there. So the second technique that I'm going to talk about is something called a double stop. Now, in our earlier examples, we were dealing primarily with a single note. Even the idea of playing a single note multiple times, it was always on one string per time. In this example, we're going to be talking about playing multiple strings simultaneously. Two, at the moment, I guess. So what's going to happen now is we're going to be laying our finger across. So in our earlier example, we want to be really making sure that you're using the tips of your fingers as best as you can. But for these ones, you have to be laying your finger a little more flat along the neck of the guitar because you have to be able to play multiple notes simultaneously. So if I were to play double stops all along your 5th fret, which is really quite convenient with this pattern, by the way, because everything goes to your 5th fret with your pointer finger, you can do double stops all the way along using those 2-string combinations. So for example, if you want to use your thinnest 2 strings, or if you want to use your next 2 strings, or next ones, and double stops are a nice way to thicken up your playing a little bit. Now it's really convenient on this side of the pattern, using your pointer finger, a little less convenient on this side of the pattern. So you can end up doing the 2 strings on your thinnest 2 strings, just the same as you did on your 5th fret. But unfortunately, on your 2nd and your 3rd string, you kind of have to stagger them a little bit. So one's on your 8th fret and one's on your 7th fret. It's just following that pentatonic pattern, but you're playing both those strings together like that. And the next 2 is just like the 5th fret. Same thing for the 5th and 4th string. And then you have to stagger them again when you get to your thickest 2 strings, because the pentatonic pattern does it like that. So you have to play these 2 notes. But what's really nice is that if you end up adding these double stops into your playing, as I mentioned, it gets a nice thick sort of sound. So if I were to do it just noodling around first, or if you were to actually arbitrarily start that song at some point, you can kind of hear it in the context of actual soloing. So again, it gets a nice, crunchy kind of a feel to it there. A lot of blues musicians use that. A lot of rock players also integrate that in their playing. It's a cool technique. This next technique is going to involve a little bit of hand strength, so it's going to be a little more difficult. And this is especially true if you're playing on an acoustic guitar. This is called bends. Now, to execute a bend, what you're going to do is you're going to play your note, as you normally did, but what you're going to do is you're going to keep that pressure on that note, and you're going to press the string up the guitar. So you're going to hit the note, and then move your finger. And you can do this with every single note in that pattern. Now notice that on my thinnest string, I end up bending in the upward direction, mainly because if I end up going in the other direction, if I go down, notice that I go off the side of the guitar. It's not very useful in that. And conversely, on my thickest string, I bend in the downward direction versus the upward because, again, same problem. Now, one little cool part of the instrument that I'd like to talk about real quick here is between the 2nd and the 3rd string. This is a really cool spot to bend because what you can do is you can end up playing the note on your 5th fret on your 2nd string. And what you can do is you can play this note on your 7th fret of your 3rd string, and a cool idea is to bend this note up to this note. And I'm going to do a video on bends at a later date that's going to talk about a couple different ways that you can end up executing this, but that's a cool one to start with. And that's a bend. Similar to a bend is going to be a vibrato. A vibrato is where you're pretty much bending it, but you're bending it in such a way where you're kind of jostling your finger along the fret. It's still probably within the category of a bend, but you're kind of doing it in a smaller range and you're going back and forth along the fret there. So what's really fun to be able to do is to add those 2 techniques together. So you can bend it and if I were to put that into context, this is that song we were doing before. Two great techniques to get under your hands. Since I'm getting a little low on time, I'm going to introduce my last 2 techniques together. And that's going to be a hammer-on and a pull-off. So let's go to the 5th fret of our thinnest string, and what you're going to do for a hammer-on is you're going to put some pressure down on that note, but what we're going to be doing is you're going to be hammering on to the next note in the pattern, which is going to be on the 8th fret of our thinnest string. So what you're going to do is you're going to strike your string, and then you're going to be hammering your finger onto that note. And it's usually a good idea to get as close as you can to that fret. Then you have to utilize less pressure, and it makes it a little easier, and you get a clearer sound as a result of it as well too there. So it's going to look something like this. And I would recommend doing that to every single string. Now, a pull-off is just the opposite. You're going to be starting with this side of the pattern. Again, in this case, it's going to be on your 8th fret with your pinky finger. And you're going to be pulling it off to the next note, which is our pointer finger on our 5th fret. So what you're going to do is you're going to do the exact same thing with the picking, but what you're going to do is you're going to be pulling this finger off to get to this note over here. Now, you kind of have to flick your finger a little bit there. That's something you're just going to have to get used to. But again, do that to every single 2-note combination on every string. Now with my students, I end up telling them to combine the two ideas. So you can do a hammer-on and a pull-off together. And to make it even a little more interesting, I end up telling them to, hey, check this out. If you do a hammer-on and pull-off, you can add the next note in the scale and it sounds really cool. And if you do the next 2 string combination, and the next 2 string combination, it's a really neat thing to get under your hand. And if you kind of hear it in context, if it starts, there it is. I toss those in there all over the place. Thanks again for checking out that video. I suggest that you go back, click onto the jam track that I have on this channel as well, get your guitar nice and tuned, grab this pattern and start applying those techniques to it. And the whole point of this is to eventually gain such a familiarity with those concepts that you're going to be able to express yourself creatively through this pattern. I hope you guys are doing well, and we'll see you next time.